hope that we've got plenty of questions, and I think that somebody tells me that Andy Keane Downs might have a question. So let's go. You've been introduced already, Andy.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thanks, Javed. That's the second time in 24 hours I've been accused of being the chief executive of Parents and Children Together. It's actually Prison Advice and Care Trust, but there we go.
My third week, so what do I...
No, it's forgivable, absolutely. It was Sky News last night, so they certainly shouldn't have got it right. I'm absolutely, as you'd expect, thoroughly delighted that Barnardo's have launched this campaign, and I agree with every single word that I've heard today, so that's wonderful. The Families Left Behind element of the campaign that you put your force behind, as you know, has been around for a while. There's been several of us battling this. It feels like the cavalry's arrived now, so that's great. I think for me, there's a couple of questions, really, for the whole panel, and it's wonderful that we have Cherie Booth, we have a judge here today, because, as you know, what we've been calling for is a statutory duty on the courts to check on the immediate welfare and care needs, not only of children who are dependent, but also dependent adults who may also be at risk. The reason we picked on both of those is, one is that I spent quite a lot of time in Holloway, where we set up the First Night in Custody scheme, meeting women night after night whose children have been left in with babysitters, with friends, home alone, and in crack houses. And despite government reassurances that pre-sentence reports and processes in the courts were adequate to deal with these issues, they are not. They are clearly not. We left a gaping hole in the system. So that is absolutely crucial. The second is that I also met a fellow from Belmarsh who was a fairly traditional, old school armed robber, not a very nice gentleman, but he was looking after his mum on the 5th floor of a tower block. He was dehydrating at the time he was in court. So I suppose my question is, how can we practically work together to achieve this? How can we get the judiciary on side with what we're asking for? And can we also please ensure that this isn't purely about children, but it's about all people who might be at risk when their carer goes to prison? Thank you.
Thank you. Javed, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can start. Thanks very much for that. I think your question about how can we work together practically, I mean, today is an example of that, and then there are many partner organisations in the audience, which I'm really delighted to see, yourself included, and the other colleagues that I mentioned. I think it's really important for an organisation like Barnardo's, given its scale, its breadth, its history, credibility, brand, and so on, to play a leading role within this. That doesn't mean we can do it on our own. It's so important that we stand together on major issues like this, and that has many, many benefits. It has many benefits for policymakers, for government. We're putting a call out to today to recognise that this isn't one organisation that's asking for this. It isn't one group of people who've experienced the pain that we've been talking about on behalf of children, but it's a whole suite of organisations that in their own way, over many, many years, like you've been doing yourself, have experienced that, have seen the problems firsthand, and that it's a collective call. And so the policymakers need to not simply give us platitudes about how they're thinking about doing something, as you mentioned yourself, but very practically respond to us about how statutorily responsibilities are going to be put in place. And I can certainly give you a commitment tonight from Barnardo's that we will not flinch from that responsibility in working with you and others.
Well, thank you for that. May I say, actually, I've been to that First Night in Custody scheme in Holloway Prison, and it opened my eyes, because you sentence somebody and you think, well, somebody's obviously warned them that they're likely to go to prison, surely, but so many people are in denial about what's happened. You saw that, didn't you, on your film too? No, it's not really going to happen. I'm innocent, or they won't send me to prison because I've got children. All of these things, and then of course the impact is devastating. And we can't just allow that to go as a glaring gap, because and not do something about it. I'm sure of that. Now, we need some more questions. The lady there.
Hi, I'm Shona Vinson, former barrister but now doing research into the impact of maternal imprisonment on children and how judges are dealing with that in sentencing. And my question was to do with what you're calling for, just for some more clarification, because you talk about child impact assessments, and you were mentioning those as well, Laura. And I know that there are, I guess I agree with everything you're saying, and it's fantastic and it's great to hear. Just put that ahead of everything, and a few of you know me and you know that's where I'm at. But I know that even within this room, people have different views on child impact assessments, how those can be handled, whether people want interference in their lives, all those kind of things. And in my research, I'm very conscious as I talk to judges, that if something is going to be put forward to them, they're going to want to know, well, how is this going to happen? And so my question really is, what mechanisms are you going to use? How are you going to work through that very complex issue to come up with proposals that actually might bite, that people will go, yes, I can see how that would work?
Who would like to answer?
I think it's really simple. I think the first thing is to say is that not every child of an imprisoned parent needs an intervention or is vulnerable or is at risk. And it's very important that we recognise that and that we don't introduce something that becomes another intrusion. What families of prisoners do not need is more surveillance and more bureaucracy to deal with. Nevertheless, unless we identify where children are at need, do have needs, or where children are at risk, or where in fact other people are at risk, unless we do identify, we cannot ever begin to meet those needs, especially in a climate where the government is talking about the privatisation of children's services, where invisible children will become more invisible. So I think we have to be very careful that what we're looking at or what we're advocating is not something that is a crude blanket instrument that will become some other source of oppression for families, but something that is applied sensitively. And I think if we put the child at the centre of the process, I think we'll be able to handle that quite well. So I don't know if I've really fully answered you, because in terms of the actual mechanisms, clearly we're a research institution. We haven't worked out how this would be done. But if I could just add on something in response to your question about partnership, I would say that what we have from our example of coping is a very strong partnership between research institutions and an NGO and NGOs. And what I would argue is that it's very important to build in gathering the evidence, not just to evaluate how well your projects run, which is necessary for funding, but to gather other kinds of data that can be used. So my call is that for the NGOs to consider partnering with a local research institution, university. I am absolutely sure that we would benefit tremendously from that partnership as we have at Huddersfield. So just a plug for that.
Just on the bit of your question about how it will be implemented. I mean, this is complicated stuff, and I have some sympathy with the people that would be responsible for the logistics of sorting out how it was done, but it's limited sympathy. We're here to speak about the plight of the children, and the evidence is very, very strong about what children need. Children need action on this. We cannot carry on in 21st century Britain in a society that we like to believe is compassionate and caring and provides for the needs of children, and have a situation where 200,000 plus children affected by parental imprisonment are unidentified and their needs are unmet. So I have limited sympathy with the people that will have to sort out the logistics, but they will have to sort it out, because we're not going to let up until they do.
So let's see, there's a gentleman at the back there with a grey suit. Well, in fact, maybe two gentlemen there, they can find it out between.
I don't know if it would be possible for maybe for me to ask my question and then to if that's John Brown from the NSPCC, and what a fantastic campaign. It's absolutely brilliant, and it's critical work, I think, really, work with with prisoners and their families, and ensuring that there are better outcomes for children and for their families. My question, I guess, was about the sharp end and about that problematic area of the certain number of prisoners that get sentenced to custody for sexual offences against children, for offences of domestic violence, domestic abuse, where contact with children then becomes problematic. I'd really be interested to hear how Barnardo's have managed that, what needs to be taken into account in those challenging situations where a father, for example, is sentenced to custody for domestic abuse or for sexual offences against children, not necessarily against children within the family, but where clearly there's an element of risk there that needs to be taken into account.
I think Laura's clearly the person to answer that.
We had this conversation
We
earlier.
did.
In Wales, we're currently working with a number of families where there has been a sexual offence within the family, not necessarily, as you said, on the children within the family. So what we have been able to do is to work to support prisons who don't necessarily know what they can do for families, where they've just put a blanket block on any visits from children without knowing whether or not they can do that or if they should be doing that. So we've been able to help that. With some children, we've been able to help them to have telephone contact with their dads. And in Park Prison, there are a specific visits time for sex offenders from their family, if the family haven't had that sexual offence within that family. So that it can be done. Again, we're working with Park Prison around domestic abuse, where there's been domestic abuse. And we're not saying we should try and get those families together. Some families we shouldn't put together. But we can look at contact arrangements, and through family group conferencing, we're making all sorts of alternative arrangements for children to have contact with their parents where it's safe to do so. But one of our main roles there is supporting other services in what they need to do, because social services often back off at that time if there's been a sexual offence because they're scared of what they can do and what they can't do. So it's about supporting other services as well.
I think when we were talking, weren't we, about that particular family I met there, and the boy and the girl had quite different views. The boy didn't want to see his father ever again. His daughter did want to see her father, but now he's been sentenced. Basically, though she was having some limited contact with him, that's all. It's all stopped, and that's causing her a lot of distress. And what we were talking about is actually we need to see what the children want, don't we? Manage that. If the children do want some sort of contact, it needs to be managed carefully, of course. But we ought to at least listen to the children and see if we can, in some way, respect their wishes, rather than just say, "Well, sorry, that's the end of it." I think since you said the person next to you also asked the question, why not?
Thank you, Sherry. Paul Ringer, Director of Children's Services at the Children's Charity Spurgeons. I was going to trumpet that very point, actually, about being child-centred. We currently run the contract in London prisons for visitor centre services, and the 2 points I'd want to make and get a reaction on are really about being child-centred and being responsive to children and actually being around in the environment to informally pick up on concerns. Unfortunately, what I would agree with is that actually some children don't require an intensive intervention and local government kind of interference in their lives. That said, at the opposite end of the spectrum, we're quite used to picking up some very sharp-end child protection and safeguarding issues through being a friendly face in that environment. So I just want to underline that point about being child-centred, but also realistic about some of these children are in very desperate situations and they are troubled families. Yeah. I think also, could I be really realistic about rising local authority thresholds? When we try to refer cases to local authority, same to Childline with John, actually we're knocking on a fairly closed door right now, and that's not good.
So the lady here, I mean, I'm not sure that anyone wants to comment. I mean, it's self-evident that resources are a real problem, aren't they? And
I don't need a microphone, I've got quite a loud voice. My name's Lorna Brooks, I'm from PSS, which is Person Shaped Support. It's an organisation that's right across the UK, but we are predominantly working in Merseyside at the moment. I've been directly running a project directly for children with parents in prison for 6-7 years now. what I'd like to say is that we support that threshold issue with social services because 75% of our referrals come directly from social services, and so therefore we're picking up face-to-face family work in the community. That this issue is. We work with children who've got parents who are murderers, parents who are sex offenders, parents, you know, who are domestic violence situations. And one of the answers to one of the questions is, you know, how do you manage that with your safeguarding issues and the child's need to have contact? And one of the things that we do is we offer supervised contact in a different way than a social worker does, because children who are in this situation struggle, I think, with statutory workers, and for good reason. Because not that there's anything wrong with what statutory workers do, but understandably there is a completely different approach that charitable organisations are able to offer, because people are not so scared of having their children removed. So we'll actually supervise, for example, we'll take children on prison visits where there is no other adult in the family that's able to do it. We'll physically do the prison visits ourselves. But we'll also do supervised letterbox contact. So for example, if I just give you a case point, if dad's in prison for domestic violence and the child still wants to have contact with the dad, but the letters can't go home to the address because dad might be writing home hypothetically and saying, you know, what's going on with your mum? Has she got a new boyfriend? The letters come to us as the mediating organisation. We read the letters, we check the contents of the letters okay, we take it to the child, we do a one-to-one support therapeutic session with the child, and the child has the opportunity to write back with support. This takes the abused mother out of the equation but allows the child to have contact. So that's just one example in many. In terms of having children's voices heard, you know, you're right, Adele, it's very much about research and practice. I've been working with the University of Central Lancashire on this, and we've been listening to the children's voices now for about 3 years, and they produced a booklet. I'm just advocating this, talking about partnership working, while I've got the chance. The kids have talked literally, they won an award actually via Marsh Christian Award, which was for volunteer work for supporting other families affected by parental imprisonment, and the children wrote this booklet which is by children for children called Don't Worry, which was their advice on how to cope with having a parent in prison. It's just one example of the work that's sort of from the ground, from the children's voices. A lot of our children actually contributed to coping, as did the families. So I think my point I'm trying to make is that for 6-7 years now we've very much been doing the kind of things that you're recommending as an organisation. You do have a much higher profile as an organisation. Barnardo's is known, PSS is not known or not well known as it would like to be. And I think I'm just here really to represent the organisation, to say that we are working with people, not in prison settings actually, but in the community. Our work is conducted in people's living rooms, in people's houses, because some people who are affected by this situation do not want anything to do with the prison setting. So I think community, physically in the community-based work is important. So I look forward to having a healthy, more productive partnership with Barnardo's, I'd like to say. But we're very much picking up on that issue that social services are already over what can I say, what's the word? Stretched, thank you.
So let's take another. There's a gentleman there, there's a red jacket, and then there's a, is it a lady? I can't. That person there. Yes, it is a lady. Yes. So I think the lady's nearer, so she can go first. Then we'll just take them.
I'm Hannah Hibbert. I'm from the National Association for Youth Justice, and also a member of the Standing Committee for Youth Justice. So my interest is perhaps, not unsurprisingly, those who are under 18 in the criminal justice system, including those in custody. So I have 2 points, two questions. One is, there are a number of under 18 young men in prison who are already parents. They're often partners of the most vulnerable mothers. So I'd be interested in knowing whether you have the means of identifying and targeting those particular children, And I was picking up on Javed's point about intergenerational offending and trying to break that cycle. And the second one is just really a brief point, which is around, I'm really pleased that Barnardo's have picked up on the risk factor of, having a parent in prison as a risk factor for children offending. So is having a sibling in prison. So will your work also take that into account?
I mean, they're good points. Would you like?
Yeah, sorry, I can't see you. Yes, through HMP Park is also a YOI, and so we're working with some of the young offenders there who are already dads. So we're working to support their partners in the community and their contact with their children. We're also supporting some who are on in the YOI and their dads are on the family intervention wing, so we're supporting them with their communication and the transition into the adult wing. I'm sorry, your second point was about the community, I think.
It's about siblings, that it's another risk factor having a sibling in prison.
When we started
there are certainly examples of young people wanting to emulate their older brother or in many ways, so it's whether you're looking at that.
When we started the community support service, we were very clear that it was about parental offending, but we soon realised that we had to widen that, and we're now working with siblings. So yeah, we're working with siblings through our community support service.
The gentleman there.
Hi, I'm John Viney. I'm on the Independent Monitoring Board of Cardiff Prison. We go in and visit prisoners to make sure their needs are taken care of as best we can. But I also serve as a magistrate in Bridgend, so sometimes I also send people into prison. 2 points really. It came out in the presentations that when warrants are signed, sometimes arrests are made, and it can be very traumatic, and obviously it can be. What normally happens when a warrant is signed is that the magistrate or judge has to ask, are there any vulnerable adults? Are there any children? And if so, are arrangements being made so that when that arrest is being done, that there is some support there. Now, I don't know what more can be done, so I'll just leave that with you. The second point is there not an argument then when sentencing, of course we don't know what the sentence is going to be till almost on the day. Is there not a case to have multi-agency groups within the court so that whatever the circumstances, it may not even be a prison, there are always needs of people who get sentenced. Is there not an argument to have multi-agency people within the court system so that there and then, whatever the problem, it can be handled?
I'm happy to take can I just take on your second point? We have a service in Northern Ireland that's been going for about 10 years now that works in partnership with NIACRO and the Quakers, who are based in the court. And when somebody is given a custodial sentence, their family is given a leaflet and told about the service. And at that time, they're very unlikely to want to take up any service because they don't think they need one, or they're too chaotic to even think about it. But that's then followed up with contact a couple of days later, and that service has been providing direct support from court to families who's got a family member who's been given a custodial. So we've got some really good examples of that. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to roll that out through funding. So we have got good practice examples that we could utilise.
And I think
Yes, I just wanted to respond to your point that this is a question regarding arrest, that this is a question that is already asked. Our study found that for children who had witnessed a parent being arrested, it does seem that the information that may have been given at the point of signing a warrant had not been communicated effectively through to the police service. So it may be an issue of communication, and clearly it's about making sure that the monitoring of existing systems, where they are in place, that we don't duplicate by advocating for more systems, but the monitoring of their implementation is more effective. The second point is really just to support something that Laura said. While there is a need for greater attention to the moment of sentencing, and I talked about different moments where children are impacted, but often families are very traumatized and adults are traumatized at that point and are very unaware at that point as to what the impact on their family will be, on their children will be, and it really is important to make sure that any information is given is followed up in the way that Laura has suggested. And then my final point refers to a question that was asked by a gentleman regarding contact. And I want to make the point that fathering, not just contact for children, but for our study demonstrated that fathers in prison are able to continue parenting children with adequate support. Actually, this relates to the lady's question regarding young fathers, that if there are better parenting support programs, especially for young fathers, that parents can parent at a distance. It is not impossible, it's not the best, it's not the optimum form of parenting, but we can improve parenting as well as maintaining contact and relationships.
I think when I was at the prison, actually, the prisoners would earn rewards, and one of them was the father who was actually reading to his child at night before he went to bed, a bedtime story, because they had earned enough credits to actually make that possible. With modern technology, lots of things can be possible. But I am conscious that we have to wind this up, and then there's some time for networking and discussion. I just was asked, we had one question from someone from the coalface who wasn't able to come tonight, so I was asked whether I would ask it for her, Nessa Khalil Quirk, who's actually a PACT family support person from YOI Bronzefield, the visitor centre. And she said, and this I think goes to another area we haven't even touched upon, which is the schools, what we do about the schools. She said, can we create a standard letter for kinship carers to pass to the head teachers about the children's parent being in prison, so that some term time visits should be allowed during early custody? Very practical question from someone at the coalface. And
yeah. So one of the things that we're working on in Wales is called the Invisible Walls Accord, which is a standard contract that all schools, we're urging all schools to sign up to, which will basically say that the schools will undergo training for their staff, and then they will appoint a single point of contact who will be the lead for any child who wants to identify themselves, or a parent who wants to identify themselves within schools, who can go to that teacher. What we're also looking at then is providing that community response. So the teachers or the schools contact the Invisible Walls team at the prison, and then they refer into the community, so we can follow that up with a response. So far we've got a number of local authorities signed up to it. We've got the support of a huge amount of organisations, but it's not something that we've been able to get as a standard across Wales. But it's a template, it's there. It's not exactly the same as this person was asking for, but it's a step in the right direction, and we're hoping to roll that out across Wales.
If I can just add, I think the principle of a letter to schools is a very good principle, but side by side has to be the training. In Wales, but across the piece, head teachers need to be trained so that they can respond appropriately, sensitively. We're aware of situations in schools where confidentiality hasn't been seen through, for example, and that is terrible when that happens. And so teachers not only need to know how to respond, but they also need to know about what other services exist, services from the organisations in this room, and how they can signpost the young person, because the school has limits to what it can do itself, and I think training packs like that are certainly going to help.
So, David, I think we need to sum up, which I believe you're going to do.
Well, yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just begin by thanking all of the people in the audience again for coming out tonight and lending your support to this campaign, and what have been, I think, very, very helpful questions. And can I also thank the panel speakers, our Honorary Vice President, Sherry Booth, who's been a great supporter, not just of this campaign, but Barnardo's for many, many years, and long may that reign, in every sense. Adele, I think you made a superb effort of shortening what you could have talked about for many, many hours, I know, and we would have all been electrified and glued to every word. You managed to include, I think it's 9 minutes in the end it was, but I was counting. But very powerful, and I'm sure there are many people in the audience that want to hear more about the outcomes of that study, and we'll give you a chance in a moment to network with them. And our expert on the panel, the real expert, the people who do the real work from the front line of organisations like Barnardo's and all the others that are represented here, is people like Laura, really, that make the greatest difference day in, day out. And Sherry and I have both seen her in action in what she does in South Wales. And all we need to do is help you multiply many times over across the whole of this nation to make the kind of difference that we need to make. But this is a hugely important campaign. Today is the beginning of a conversation. This isn't the end, this is just the start. And many of the questions that you've been asking, the answers will evolve. They will develop. We're already in conversation with government at a high level. We're speaking to the policymakers, the thinkers, those that can have influence on the future. The response so far has been positive. The door is open. People want to discuss this. There's no kind of challenge about convincing them that there is a need to do something. What that something will be, how it's going to be organised and so on, we have a responsibility within that as well to help the policy thinkers work that through and see how it can make the maximum difference. My message again to all of you is let's work together on this. Let's not leave it to a few of the organisations in the room, but let's all join hands, lock arms, stand together and make the difference for the children that need us to do it for them and do it quickly. There are some drinks, I think, in the other room there. Everybody registered earlier on, so please stay. Do enjoy those refreshments and network. Thank you very much for coming.